God, this is an episode for OnlyFans, not the performance proposition.
So me and Zab have decided to branch out, and we will be releasing our OnlyFans link next week.
Basically, the conversation we're going to talk about is whether or not you should ever use a Bosu ball or a wobble board. So what value they add, where they might be a step too far, and why you might consider using them.
Yeah.
So the reason it's important is like pretty much every single influencer you see on social media these days is either very much you should only do things that are coordinated and really, really ultra functional, or you should never do anything that uses a Bosu ball and they should all be burnt.
As social media is.
Pretty much.
Yes or no? There is no in between.
There is no in between.
There is no in between ever.
And I've decided that from this point forward, I am just going to be Team Bosu every second of my life.
Team Bosu.
Yeah.
So you're going full functional patterns.
I'm going to do a 200 kilo squat on a Bosu.
Eyebrows.
I'm going to pop the Bosu first, and it will happen at some point in the next 10 years. Because I don't think that a Bosu could actually take my weight plus a 200 kilo bar. But be interesting to see.
Yeah. I mean, in fairness, like when you say that, the combined weight is nearly 300 kilos. What more then?
It would be excessive. Can you imagine stepping on a Bosu ball with 200 kilos on your back? That's terrifying enough. But then the moment it pops, you get fired off the ground by about an inch and then hit the ground very hard.
Yeah.
Preferably still on 2 feet rather than just on my face. But
yeah, I mean, walking 200 kilos out the other day was fucking hard enough.
Yeah, Matt nearly squatted 200 kilos yesterday.
Emphasis on nearly.
Nearly. If he wasn't a wet wipe, he would have squatted 200 kilos. But unfortunately, he is the wettest of wipes.
Yeah. Yeah. I've watched the video. I've watched it back. We can even put the video over the top of this so that people can judge how wet I was actually being.
I'm surprised that you even need to look at the video again. I think it was the sort of thing that you would have an out of body experience, watch yourself fail, and feel so disgusted by, and then have that moment just relive itself in your brain over and over and over again for the rest of your life until you hit 200 kilos next week. Yeah, because you will hit 200 kilos next week.
I will. I mean, just the beard will be a little bit longer next week, and we all know that it's like 5% per inch.
That's why I'm waiting for my beard to finally grow through.
Avocado oil and peppermint oil, I've heard.
I mean, I hear all sorts of things for hair growth, as you can imagine. Now that I'm not well, as you probably heard all the time. Like the second that my hair started falling out, someone was like, "Lavender oil, peppermint oil. These things will work." And it's like, nah, I don't think they're going to work.
Did you ever try the caffeine shampoo?
The Alpecin stuff.
Yeah.
No, my little brother got upset. My little brother has incredible hair. My little brother, I mean, he will go bald because he has my Spanish granddad's genetics, and my Spanish granddad just didn't have anything on top. By the time we were like, when you have like your memories, your earliest memories of somebody. Granddad must have been like 60, 63, and was just, he had a cold top to his head.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking to a guy
Yeah.
who looked like your granddad at 63 at 22.
I feel like there's still a bit up there though. Like when you don't keep.
I mean,
there's still some patches of fluff, whereas his was like.
I mean, I've got the monk. I've got capacity to do a monk.
What, the little
tuft
at the front?
well, just not even a tuft, just like the full
ring.
Full ring. Like I've got a full ring in me, but
You do you, Matt.
I do. I don't do you.
Don't.
Some of the time.
God, this is an episode for OnlyFans, not the performance proposition.
So me and Zab have decided to branch out, and we will be releasing our OnlyFans link next week. Anyway, on to stability boards.
And why they might be useful.
Are we incorporating sort of any stability work, or are we sticking just around Bosu balls, stability balls, like, or are we thinking? I joke about it, and I don't even know if legally I'm allowed to say the words functional patterns on a video, but those videos where we're moving the arms, like getting bands pulling you in different directions, are we covering that, or are we just sticking?
I think we can kind of like briefly cover the benefit of all of it, but I think we should try and stick to Bosus where we can. So if we're talking about functional patterns, we're talking about stability exercises, we're talking about coordination exercise, skill exercise, whatever you want to refer to it as, there is the strength coordination spectrum, and anything that exists along that is skill work, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
And the further you move towards coordination, the less force you're going to be able to produce. The further you work towards force, the less coordinated the task can be. So you're not going to be able to produce maximum force in a more coordinated task. It's why you're going to see drop off in mechanical tension when you move from a leg press to a squat, for instance. But then you're going to see it drop off again as you move towards a lunge, or as you move towards a Bosu squat, or as you move towards some kind of Bosu squat with a band pulling you in one direction and a cable pulling you in another direction and a kettlebell in one hand. Like all of that sort of stuff. It's moving down that chain will automatically see a loss in maximum force production, but that doesn't necessarily mean it can't be beneficial towards fitness.
It's very similar in a regard, I guess, to like the force speed spectrum. You can only move so much weight so fast. The faster the sport, the faster the movement pattern, the less muscle fibers you're going to be able to recruit in that time, and as a result, the less force you're going to be able to produce. Similar sort of principles. Same with strength and endurance. Same with strength and flexibility. Same with speed and coordination, like all of those spectrums, like anything, any of those axes can be combined to create a spectrum. And the further you move towards one end of the spectrum, the more it's going to impact your ability to maximize the other end of the spectrum. In your mind, then, what are like the three main benefits of Bosu balls?
The three main benefits.
Yeah, like break it down. Go like
three main benefits.
Three
or three
reasons
main
you would use it.
So basically, the way I see a Bosu ball is, it's trying to promote a stimulus that requires reflexive control. So your body, like you can consciously control movement, or you can reflexively control movement. So either you tell your leg that you want it to extend, or you tell your leg that you want it to move out to the side, or your leg reacts to an external cue without you necessarily having to control that movement. And that's really important when it comes to sporting actions, because so many times that reflexive control is needed because the movement itself is too quick for you to send any kind of feedback from the mechanoreceptors in your muscles to your brain, back down from your brain to those muscles to tell them how to react and how to respond. And it's just going to lead to really inefficient, really shaky movements, which you'll notice if you do step onto a stability board and you try to control it too much, you'll find that you shake all over the place. Whereas if you just allow yourself to respond reflexively, it will naturally wobble a little bit, but it won't be as excessive. By moving into that kind of proprioceptively enriched environment where you're standing on something that is unstable, you're providing a bigger stimulus for those mechanoreceptors to improve their control of your body position in space. So that's kind of the main benefit, and you can kind of use that. If we're thinking about the most important uses for that, it's probably coming from like an injury rehab perspective. Yep. So if you have someone who's had an ACL injury or a ankle injury and their proprioception in that joint is reduced, using a Bosu ball or using a wobble board will be a really easy way for you to improve that proprioception without impact, so that when you then go back into like running or jumping, you can respond better to anything, any kind of unstable surface that you're running or moving over. The second benefit would probably be for things like core control. So I would use it for like kneeling, kettlebell, halos, or round the worlds, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
So it's just providing an unstable base so that your core has to respond to instability in your base while you're performing a movement with your upper body, which is just a really useful way to get your core to engage reflexively and deal with unstable environments. So if you're taking impact in rugby and you're having to deal with that coming from multiple sides, you're not just having to like brace for that impact, but you're also learning how to reflexively control against that impact.
Yeah. Or sprinting,
yeah.
Like where you need that level of flexibility, like you need the core to move a little bit.
It's multi-directional sprints as well.
Yeah.
So that's probably the second thing that I'd say it's useful for. But then the third thing I'd say it's useful for is anything where you're working on low force, high endurance type exercise. So if you're a long distance runner, if you're particularly a trail runner, having something that teaches you how to control movement more effectively is going to mean that you're going to move more efficiently within your sport.
Yeah.
And that can only be beneficial 100%. To long-term performance, because realistically, moving too far down a strength spectrum probably isn't going to help you that much for long distance running, because the amount of force that you're having to cope with, like dealing with it to an extent, like we've spoken in previous podcasts, dealing with impact and being able to tolerate that impact and tolerate that load is going to be useful. So moving down the strength spectrum to the point that you've reached that is good. But at a certain point, it's going to be better for you to learn how to move more economically, and that's going to come from better movement control, better reflexive control. So again, bringing in instability or proprioceptively enriching tools in general, whether that's even just something as simple as closing your eyes, is going to be a beneficial thing for your performance overall.
So to recap, injury rehab, core control,
and movement efficiency.
Just to throw a fourth on top of there, because I think we talk a lot from a ultra performance perspective, but if you're just looking at the fitness industry as a whole, working with elderly populations, given that we know that proprioceptors, especially the hair cells in your ear, die as you get older and they don't grow back. So you get less balanced and you rely more on your proprioception, your mechanoreceptors in your feet and your hands and all that sorts of stuff. So being able to tie that all together, especially in older, less balanced population, and you can even take it one step further and say Paralympic sport.
Yeah.
Guys with multiple sclerosis or muscle control difficulties, that's going to be hugely beneficial to those guys, and those guys are still 100% elite athletes in their own right. So when we're talking about this stuff, we're not just talking dude in a gym doing a squat on a Bosu ball and being like, is that going to grow you more muscle? There's so much more.
I think the other thing for Gen Pop is the amount of times you'll hear people say, oh, well, you don't need to do anything that's moving down this coordination spectrum because you can kind of get that from your sport. The vast majority of people in day-to-day life are not doing a sport. So them going to a gym and only focusing on building strength means they're never going to get any kind of challenge to stability, proprioception.
And even from that sport specificity perspective, people I think people take it a little bit too far. They're like, oh, you don't want the stuff in the gym to look exactly like your sport. And it's to an extent yes, to an extent no. There are benefits. Let's say an Olympic lifter, a surfer, a skateboarder, at a high level, those guys are all guys who get a lot of reflexive control from doing their sport. But a lot of the time, like you say, the loads are so high and the movements are so quick that they have no time to react while they're doing it. So a better ability to build that, to then put them into those things so that they can focus more on what they need to do, how, like a surfer, for example, can focus on getting up, just standing up, looking at where the wave is, looking at what they've got coming up, looking at how they need to move. A skateboarder can think, okay, that obstacle's coming up, I've got to put some force into the board at this point, knowing that their body underneath all of that is
capable of responding. So that's one of the things, one of the key arguments that you see all the time is there is a level to which you need to develop coordination or need to develop skill, and anything beyond that is kind of superfluous to requirements. The thing that I find interesting about that is people are very much oh, we don't want it to look too much like their sport, we don't want to move too far down the coordination spectrum because that's going to take away from maximum strength. But they'll apply completely different logic to maximum speed, maximum strength, and maximum power. So they'll go, okay, right, there's no limit to how much strength you should be able to create. There's no limit to how much power you should be able to create. There's no limit to how much speed you should be able to create. But there is a limit to flexibility and there is a limit to coordination. And it's this is how much force they need to produce. This is how much strength they need to produce. This is how coordinated they need to be. You kind of want to be beyond that on every single one of your training modalities. You don't just want to go to the limit of what they're capable of what they need for their sport. You want to go slightly beyond.
Yeah.
So if that does mean that incorporating a little bit more coordination stuff into their program is going to be beneficial, and in a sport where there's a really high need for coordination, like skateboarding, snowboarding, gymnastics, ice skating, all of those things, then all of a sudden the way to move beyond that within a gym environment might be taking a step up onto something that is providing an unstable base for the individual. And getting them to learn how to control their movement on that unstable base. From
a critical perspective,
let's
kind of take a step back and let's look at it from a, people will be looking at this and one of the big arguments that they'll probably see is you see stupid influencers doing stupid things. For example, someone might say, I'm going to do a 200 kilo squat on a Bosu ball. My point is, do you think there are diminishing returns too? Because a lot of what we've talked about is, standing on a Bosu ball, eyes closed, moving, proprioception. Especially for those endurance guys, that low level endurance coordination stuff, because obviously the more fatigued you are, the more you are going to rely on that and the less your muscles are going to be able to cope with it. So you're going to have less balance, less coordination. I think there's some research I remember reading about at uni. Basketball players, the more tired they are, the higher the chance of injury because they're less in control of their bodies. At what point do you think there's diminishing returns to loading stability exercises on Bosu balls?
I think it comes down to the same as any other modality of training. If adding in additional load down one avenue takes away from your ability to push another avenue that would actually be more beneficial, then it's probably time to stop doing it, right? In the same way as like you could strength train endlessly and it will always to some degree benefit your performance to be slightly stronger, because regardless of, I mean, there are stats around like the fact that if you're producing less than 40% of your maximum force, there's no benefit to being able to produce extra force within a sport. But then the fitter you are, the greater the percentage of your maximum force you're going to be able to sustain, so then all of a sudden it benefits you to get stronger again. So there's always going to be some degree of improvement associated with moving down that spectrum. But at some point, the amount of work you need to do to get stronger detracts from your endurance training, detracts from your stability training, which might make you a better athlete, particularly if you're an endurance athlete. I think it's exactly that. It's like if I'm doing a coordination exercise, and as a result of that coordination exercise, I'm not meeting the needs for force development for my sport, I've probably moved too far down that avenue. But I do think that there's ways you can increase stability, like a challenge to stability, without necessarily seeing too big a drop off in force production, right? Yeah. So it's like I said earlier, you can leg press and you'll see more force production in your primary muscles than you would by doing a back squat or a split squat. You can still build up your split squat to a point where you can improve maximum strength by doing the split squat.
Basically, we probably don't want to get to a point where moving loads in a back squat on a Bosu ball that would like as our strength stimulus.
But yeah, I mean that would be a ridiculous thing to do.
Yeah. Cool.
Doesn't mean I don't want to at some point try it, but like
it doesn't mean,
yeah. But if my knees both explode, then my knees both explode. But
I mean,
it would be cool YouTube content.
I mean that's what I said to you earlier. Like by the time I finish training, I'm gonna have no elbows, no knees. My ankles are gonna be useless, squeaky hinge joints, but I'll be happy. Right. So we talked about.
I think the thing we need to kind of maybe cover is the other side of the argument. So we've spoken about like why it's useful to do stability training. Like we both accept that there are people going way too far down the functional spectrum. And I think the main thing about that argument is when people say, "Oh, don't worry about deadlifting, don't worry about squatting, don't worry about doing these things, just do this instead."
Yeah.
And it's like, well, there's benefit to those things as well. It just depends on your sport, how far you want to move down those.
Yeah, that's the question I was going to ask. We've spent this little bit of time saying, okay, all those people saying don't do stability work, this is why it's important. Now, we should probably look at all those people saying, like, you know, like I say, the guys down the other end of the spectrum saying, this is all you need.
Yeah.
Why is it not?
So why the coordination guys are wrong?
Like let's just take a hypothetical example.
If you spend your entire time working on coordination, and as a result you don't get stronger, or you don't get strong enough to meet the needs of your sport, then that's going to massively impact your performance.
The argument that those guys would make is that most sport is body weight, and so only training in unstable environments and increasing the external load. So this is the reason I thought this was a good segue into this. Yeah. I just asked you about the squats. When do we see diminishing returns? Those guys would argue there's never diminishing returns and that you should do everything in an unstable environment because sport is unstable. Yep. And therefore what you can tolerate in an unstable environment is increasing your threshold for your sport.
But if we've said that there's this spectrum and coordination stuff prevents you from producing maximum force, you're leaving so much untapped potential at the other end of the spectrum. If you work somewhere up this other end of the spectrum and you build maximum strength, your ability to then produce more force further down the spectrum is also going to improve. And then it's like, for me, it's that whole thing of like any decent training program moves from one end of the spectrum to another, right? You just go, like whether that's moving from muscular strength endurance up towards maximum strength, maximum power, and then back down, so going long to short, short to long. But whether you're going from a more coordinated exercise to a more simple exercise to build maximum force and then moving back down the chain to try and apply more force on a more coordinated level. Like there's always going to be untapped potential at some point in the spectrum if you don't train that part of the spectrum. So that's kind of the main thing. The thing that I think is kind of relevant is when you speak about people like all the kind of bodybuilding influencers out there that would say using a Bosu is completely irrelevant. Their argument is that you can build coordination and build maximum strength, which is going to be much more beneficial to the vast majority of people, or they would say to everybody. What their argument is, and it does make sense, is if you've got someone who has never done any kind of resistance training in their life, there's a load of untapped strength development there.
100%.
So helping those people move along that avenue and get stronger is also going to make them better. They're probably going to improve their mobility. They're probably going to improve their coordination as they move along that. If you get someone who's never been able to squat and you suddenly get them to a point where they can squat 60 kilos relatively well to full depth, 100 kilos relatively well to full depth, that person has got stronger by work and more mobile and more coordinated, and probably met the needs of day-to-day life by working on that exercise. That narrative, there is that side to the argument, and it's a reasonable argument.
But then when you get there, you ask yourself, just because they can do that, does that mean that they're going to be able to, I don't know, let's say go do a Ninja Warrior course up in Bristol on the weekend and not fall over and break their arm because although they're strong enough, they're not coordinated enough?
But it's when you see people who have only ever trained in a gym environment, and then you with resistance training, and then you see them try and run, and their ground contact time's 2 seconds per step, and you're like, okay, we need to work on reactivity there and trying to change direction quickly and abruptly. They're not able to do that because of the fact they don't have that coordination in them. They look unstable, they look unathletic when they do certain movements because of the fact they just don't have the capacity to coordinate their body in space. So you've done the strength work, you've become more mobile, you've become more coordinated, but have you become as coordinated as you could by going down that route? And are there other things that would have helped you in a different way, could still help you in a different way?
Yeah.
And how could you incorporate them into your plan? That's fundamentally it, right? I saw this post the other day and it really annoyed me because it was this guy basically saying people shouldn't refer to everything as another tool that you have in your toolbox. And it's like, I get it I get the argument to a point, right? I get the argument of there are some things that are just so stupid that they shouldn't even be discussed. And I had someone turn around to me once and ask me if I thought they should go on the grape only diet, where they only eat grapes because grapes contain everything they need for life. And you're like, well, probably not true, and probably a stupid idea. Can I see where the logic was behind the grape only diet? You're not gonna gain weight on a grape only diet. You are going to lose weight quickly. But
see, I was about to say, I was like, but there are certain circumstances in which anything's valid, and then you said grape only, and I was like, I don't even feel like I can make that.
I mean, that one really upset me. It did.
Do you think I should go on the grape only diet?
So there are certain things out there that are so stupid. Yeah. But but the vast majority of things people are using that are working for people. The things that are being discussed in the majority of cases are things that have been tried, have been found to be successful in some way, shape or form. And it's understanding why that's been successful, what the root process that's stimulating is, what's the adaptation that it's causing, and then understanding, okay, cool, that's a tool that I could use for that reason in this set of circumstances. Are there other ways that I could maybe achieve that same stimulus or a smaller stimulus with another thing? Maybe. And maybe maybe instead of getting someone standing on a wobble board, you get them standing on a soft cushion. Yeah. Because it's a bit more stable. Yeah. They can still produce a bit more force, but they're still getting that increase in proprioception. Yeah. But once you've got that, is it worth going down that spectrum a little bit further to make that exercise harder in some cases?
Yeah. I mean, it's also understanding the individual that you've got in front of you, right? That's kind of something that also gets lost, I think, a lot of the time in these polarized debates. Is we're trying to talk about the population as one. Yeah. And a hypothetical client that everything works for, right? And we know already that in statistics X never exists. Yeah. Right? The average of a population that everyone should do. We see it in clothes, we see it in other things. The average thing doesn't actually exist. It's not a number that exists in real life and I don't know what the maths...
I had a client called Martin Oncheré, shout out to Martin Oncheré, who came to me and said that his goal was to become average. That was all he wanted.
Just want to be average.
He was I mean, he'd already failed because he was already pretty intelligent and pretty well aware of himself. So he's already doing better than the vast majority of us, especially the majority of personal trainers. So I hope that he's doing okay. I hope that he's somewhere towards his mission.
But no, I mean,
I hope he's above average.
Yeah, the point that I was going to make was when I put the story up of me missing 200, one of my clients messaged me and he was like, "Oh, don't beat yourself up too much. You're probably pretty fatigued. There was a lot of volume that preceded that. Next time, maybe do singles." And I was like, I get where you're coming from, but for me, my body likes the priming effect. So if I was trying to jump straight from 180 to 190, it would be too big a jump. If I do 180 for a double, my body's like, sweet.
Yeah.
Like, I felt that little bit of fatigue. I've been able to be like, okay, that first rep wasn't great. Let me get more tension in my upper back.
Yeah.
Let me feel that. And my body's like, okay, sweet. Now I can go to 190. And like, there's a balance between how much of that fatigue you induce and diminishing returns. And like, to an extent, maybe there's a case for smaller jumps, more reps, whatever. But either way, the overriding point is
every individual is different and needs to approach things in a different way.
Exactly. Someone might turn up to the gym and you're like, okay, what do you do? Like, you know, and they're like, oh, cool, I surf on weekends. And you're like, okay, cool, we probably don't need to do too much balance work with you because you're probably
a relatively balanced individual.
Pretty good at it.
Emotionally and physically.
Emotionally and physically, exactly. I always think as well with these things, like taking a step away from talking about everything in terms of strength and coordination and power. Even if we just take a step back and we look at like endurance training as like a metaphor for this. Cardiac output training, i.e. your 85, 90% heart rate training, basically hypertrophies your heart, makes your heart more efficient, pumps more blood around the body, right? Mm-hmm. You can't get fitter indefinitely doing that type of training only.
No.
Because all of that blood has to go somewhere. And doing that training doesn't produce the adaptation that allows more of that blood to get into the muscle.
Well, more oxygen, more glucose to get into the muscle.
Yeah, well, but even just more of the blood to even get close to the muscle. The other type of training that you then would do is your 70% and under training, i.e. what people most refer to as like zone 2, even though it's not really zone 2 because 70 to 80% will still induce similar benefits. But basically aerobic, right? Where the benefits of that are going to be more capillarization, more mitochondria, better ability to utilize the oxygen at a muscle level. And so you're like, okay, cool. So I just have to do both of these. And most people understand that they have to do both of these. But then when we take it into like a training perspective, people lose sight of that completely. And they're like, rather than looking at these things working off each other and being interconnected, like you're 40, 5D?
40. 5D if you had psychology, but
model of fitness in that, like, if I improve strength, I also improve coordination. But if I improve coordination, I also improve strength. I mean, we've spoken about like a belief that I would like to explore further of mine about Olympic lifting. And whether or not learning to do that and improving coordination in that sense actually makes you more efficient at building strength and hypertrophy and
building power,
better connection with your muscles because you're learning to use them in different ways and you're developing a deeper connection with your body and how it moves.
There is research that shows that benefit to some degree, right? There's the whole idea that taking an exercise and incorporating a novel exercise which requires you to think more in order to coordinate that movement and learn that new skill actually requires more muscular effort to perform that exercise because of the fact by being a little bit less coordinated, the movement becomes less efficient. So the muscles have to work harder to compensate for that, which then means there's more mechanical tension, which then means there's more hypertrophy, which then means there's a bigger strength benefit. And then, as you become better at performing that new move, you become more efficient at performing that new move. So you've got that additional force, plus your ability to apply that force more efficiently. So the internal force is greater, and the external force is even greater because it's multiplied by both improvements. It just seems wild to me that like people don't.
It takes so little away, right? I think that's the crazy thing for me is I'm like, usually when you're talking about these things, you know, you're talking about strength versus power versus speed versus whatever, and you're like, if I do too much of that, it takes away from my ability to do. I feel like coordination and skill development is like, and the same with like mobility and flexibility, like you say, they're two aspects of your training that take nothing away from everything else. Like they're literally free gains. It's literally like, if you do that, you're not going to, like, it's not going to induce a level of fatigue that's going to stop you from squatting. If anything, it's going to make you better.
If you're worried about the fact it's going to take away from your strength and your speed and your power, keep your primary strength, speed and power work as like the main bulk of your session. And then do more skill and mobility stuff as your activation and warm-up stuff or as your accessory work or on your recovery day. And it's not going to take away from your volume that's associated with strength. It's just going to help you improve the efficiency with which you move, and that is so important.
Do a warm up. Do a minute on an assault bike. Mm-hmm. Stand on one foot on a Bosu ball with your eyes closed for a minute. Stand on your other foot on a Bosu ball, or even just stand on one foot. No Bosu ball. Just stand on one foot with your eyes closed for a minute. And stand on the other foot with your eyes closed for a minute, and then go fucking train.
And if you don't have a minute, 30 seconds, and just take a slight progression on it. If you literally, that's the thing that's like. If you're using it as part of your warm-up, right, just because of the fact it's a warm-up exercise doesn't mean you can't progress the warm-up exercise as you get better at it. So like if you are just starting off by standing on one leg for 30 seconds and then you progress to standing on one leg for 30 seconds with your eyes closed. Then you progress to standing on a towel on one leg with your eyes closed. Then on a cushion on one leg with your eyes closed. Then on a Bosu on one leg with your eyes closed. It's not taking away from the rest of the session. Your body is going to get better at each of those. So all you're doing is just getting more bang for your buck from your warm-up exercises, and that's going to prepare you better for the later exercises. So why not do it?
Do you know what I really enjoy? Is the more caffeinated we've both become, the more intense this conversation has become.
I mean, I'm feeling shaky right now.
Oh my god, Bosu!
This is what Matt meant by the fact that I was on the verge of strangling somebody the other day. He found me after 2 coffees having an argument with 2 people, and yeah, this is the energy that I had, but it was entirely coffee related.
That same energy.
I don't do drugs, but I will basically put my mouth underneath a coffee grinder.
Sniff it.
It was the other day. So the other day, one of my clients had an issue in his workplace where the pipe had burst, so the waste pipe had burst into their locker room, and there was some shit coming down into their locker room. Apparently, some white trainers were very badly harmed. But he came in, and he was like, "I can't get the smell of this shit out of my nostrils." So I went to the cafe and I was like, "Oh, come on, just get some coffee beans," because you know when you go to Yankee Candle between because if you've ever been in a relationship, you'll have gone to a Yankee Candle. They give you coffee beans between each sniff of each candle to clear your nose because it's a really good it. So if you sniff coffee beans between different experiences, you get a better understanding of what each of those next candles smells like. So I went to the bar and I got a little cup of coffee beans, and he was just sniffing them between sets. And someone walked up to me and they're like, "Does that work?" And I was like, not for what you're thinking it's going to work for, but
not quite. But
no, I mean, we could test it.
You should just tell him that it does, and he'll probably feel more energetic. Placebo.
Placebo's a king.
Placebo's a king.
Yeah.
I feel like we should summarize, wrap up, and
disappear because you've got a session and I've got a food shop to do because my dad is coming over for an engagement party and dinner and birthday party all in one. Yeah.
Excellent.
My dad got engaged last week.
Oh.
Yeah.
Fair play.
Yeah. In Japan, which is just outrageous. Had to one up me.
That's all right. Fuck you, son. So basically, I feel like the overarching points here are to come back to your 3 situations in which you'd use it, or even let's call it 5 because we came up with some extra ones, right? It's very good for rehab, core control, elderly population / general stuff.
Yeah.
Movement efficiency. And
so particularly in endurance sports. So anything where there is a low force requirement and a high coordination requirement, why not make coordination the central pillar of your training?
They're free gains. You don't lose anything by doing them. Same with mobility work. Stop looking at them like it's just weirdos doing it, because it's not. It's a genuine adaptation that we can get, and it's probably one of the easiest to acquire because it takes very, very, very little away from everything else.
It doesn't take away from the fact that there are weirdos that are doing it.
It doesn't take away from the fact there are weirdos doing it. We all accept that.
Yep.
Instagram has unfortunately become that place. Enables weirdos.
Yep, it doesn't enable weirdos.
So, you don't need to go that crazy with it, but you'd be not stupid not to do it, but you'd be leaving a lot of gains on the table if you didn't.
You'd be leaving potential gains on the table if you don't do it. And it's so the final thing that I just want to make the point of is that if you can establish that there is any circumstance where something's useful, and you can understand why it's useful in that circumstance, then you can't call it useless. So I don't think that anyone would argue that stability balls aren't useful for rehab. So the second you say that they are useful for rehab, we understand that they're useful for rehab because they build up proprioception. So therefore, it's a useful tool in improving proprioception. Whether you incorporate it or not is fine, except it's got a role, and maybe use it if it's going to benefit you.
I kind of feel weird that there's no one wins this week.
I feel like they won.
I feel like they won. I feel like everyone won. Everyone won now.
Congratulations, team.
What do you want to talk about next week? Do you want to go back to arguing, or do you want to pick another topic? Or
I think we could go back to having a debate. I've got what was it that I saw earlier that wound me up?
We've got to find something that we disagree on, though. That's the kicker.
That is it. So one of the other reasons why we had this conversation today in this type of format was because of the fact we've realised that we don't hold like insanely strong positions on any of the arguments. So it's really hard to like present ourselves as though we are in one camp or another. And it's a lot easier to have a conversation where it's like, actually, this is something that I saw. I don't necessarily agree with it. What are your thoughts? Oh, let's go back and forth on that. I have enjoyed. Like, I thought this was quite good. Good little way to spend 45 minutes.
Yeah, I think so.
Especially with the coffee. Yeah.
Although I do feel like the squirrel from over the hedge right now. I feel like time is moving slowly, and I am moving quickly through it. We'll come up with something at some point, and
we'll talk about it.
Talk about it.
Yeah. Right. Peace out.
Peace out.